A man went to Reddit because he was done with his sister forever. He said she had spent years lying, stealing, manipulating everyone around her, and turning every family gathering into a disaster. Thousands of people read his post and immediately took his side. Honestly, when I first heard the story, I did too. But then the updates started rolling in, and by the end, the entire internet was questioning everything they thought they knew. Hey everyone, I'm Lilly, and if you enjoy dramatic Reddit stories packed with twists, secrets, and endings that completely change your perspective, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who loves a good story. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one because every update gets crazier than the last. Now let's jump into today's Reddit story. The original post came from a 32-year-old man named Ethan. He explained that he had recently made the decision to cut his younger sister, Chloe, out of his life permanently. According to Ethan, this wasn't a decision he made lightly. He said it was the result of nearly 15 years of chaos, disappointment, and betrayal. Chloe was 28 years old and, in Ethan's words, had been the source of every major problem their family had faced since she was a teenager. Ethan described Chloe as someone who always needed to be the center of attention. If someone else had a birthday, Chloe would find a way to create a crisis. If someone got engaged, Chloe would suddenly have an emergency. If family members were celebrating an achievement, somehow the conversation always ended up being about Chloe. At first, Ethan thought it was just immaturity. But as the years passed, he became convinced that she intentionally manipulated people. Then he started listing examples. When Chloe was 19, she borrowed nearly $2,000 from their parents and never paid it back. When she was 21, she borrowed Ethan's car and returned it with significant damage, claiming she had no idea what happened. When she was 23, she convinced their grandmother to loan her money for what she claimed was an educational program. Later the family discovered no such program existed. Every story made Chloe sound worse. What really pushed Ethan over the edge happened just a few months before the post. Their mother had celebrated her 60th birthday. The family rented a venue, invited relatives from across the country, and spent months planning the event. According to Ethan, Chloe arrived over an hour late. Then, halfway through dinner, she announced that she had something important to share. Everyone expected a pregnancy announcement. Instead, Chloe stood up and accused Ethan of treating her unfairly for years. Ethan wrote that the room immediately became uncomfortable. Guests sat silently while Chloe claimed he had spent most of their adult lives judging her. She accused him of acting superior and turning relatives against her. Ethan said he couldn't believe what he was hearing. In his mind, he had spent years cleaning up messes Chloe created herself. The argument escalated quickly. Eventually Chloe left the party in tears. Several relatives followed her outside. The birthday celebration was effectively ruined. Ethan said that after that night he decided enough was enough. He blocked Chloe's number, removed her from social media, and informed his parents that he would no longer attend events if she was present. Most commenters agreed with him. In fact, the top comments were overwhelmingly supportive. People pointed out that Chloe seemed selfish. Others argued that family members often tolerate bad behavior far longer than they should. Many told Ethan he was finally establishing healthy boundaries. Reading the post, it was hard not to agree. I mean, based on the information he provided, Chloe sounded exhausting. If someone constantly creates problems and refuses to take responsibility, there comes a point where protecting your own peace makes sense. At least that's what I thought at the time. A few days later, Ethan posted an update. He explained that his parents were furious about the situation. His mother begged him to reconsider. His father claimed that families should stay together no matter what. Ethan refused. He said he had already given Chloe more chances than she deserved. Then he revealed something that caught people's attention. His parents had quietly continued helping Chloe financially for years. Not just occasionally. Constantly. Rent payments. Credit card debt. Car repairs. Medical bills. Unexpected expenses. According to Ethan, every time Chloe got herself into trouble, their parents stepped in to rescue her. He believed they had enabled her behavior and prevented her from ever facing consequences. Again, Reddit largely supported him. People argued that the parents were part of the problem. Some even suggested that Chloe behaved the way she did because nobody ever held her accountable. Then Ethan shared a detail about his childhood. He mentioned that Chloe had always been treated differently. At first, readers assumed he meant she was spoiled. But Ethan's wording was strange. He wrote that his parents were protective to an unhealthy degree. Whenever Chloe got into trouble at school, they rushed to defend her. Whenever teachers complained, his parents blamed the teachers. Whenever Chloe made mistakes, someone else was somehow responsible. The statement didn't seem particularly important at first. In fact, most readers focused on the financial issues and birthday drama. But months later, people would return to that sentence and realize it was the first clue that something wasn't adding up. At the end of the update, Ethan revealed one final piece of information. After being blocked, Chloe had sent him a handwritten letter through the mail. He hadn't opened it. He claimed there was nothing she could possibly say that would change his mind. Instead, he placed the letter in a drawer and forgot about it. At least for the moment. And looking back, that unopened letter would end up changing everything. Because hidden inside was a truth Ethan had spent nearly 20 years refusing to see. When Ethan posted again about 2 weeks later, he expected more people to agree with him. Instead, something strange started happening. A handful of commenters began asking questions he couldn't easily answer. It started with someone pointing out that almost every example Ethan had shared involved money, arguments, or family drama, but very few details about Chloe as a person. One commenter asked a simple question: if your sister is really as terrible as you say, why do your parents keep defending her after all these years? Ethan initially dismissed the question. He responded that his parents had always babied Chloe and treated her like she could do no wrong. But the more people pressed him, the more frustrated he became. Then he revealed another story he thought would finally prove his point. Years earlier, when Chloe was 24, she had disappeared for nearly 3 months. According to Ethan, she barely answered calls, skipped family events, and worried everyone. Their mother cried almost every day. Their father spent weekends trying to track her down. Then one day Chloe suddenly returned and acted as if nothing had happened. Ethan said she refused to explain where she had been. She offered vague answers, avoided questions, and expected everyone to move on. To Ethan, it was just another example of her selfishness. Most readers agreed. But a smaller group noticed something odd. If Chloe truly disappeared for 3 months and refused to explain why weren't her parents angry? Why were they so quick to welcome her back? Ethan admitted that his parents never punished her. In fact, they seemed relieved more than anything else. That answer only generated more questions. Around the same time, Ethan's aunt reached out after learning about the Reddit posts. According to Ethan, she warned him that publicly discussing family issues could create more problems than it solved. Ethan thought she was defending Chloe. He told his aunt that he was tired of everyone making excuses for her behavior. The conversation ended badly. What bothered Ethan most was something his aunt said before hanging up. She told him, "One day you're going to realize you've only been told half the story." Ethan included that line in his update because he thought it was ridiculous. Readers, however, became fascinated by it. Half the story? What exactly was that supposed to mean? Ethan insisted there was nothing more to know. Chloe had been causing problems for years. End of discussion. But then another event complicated things even further. A few days after posting, Ethan attended a small family barbecue hosted by one of his cousins. He expected Chloe to stay away. Instead, she showed up unexpectedly. Ethan immediately considered leaving. However, several relatives convinced him to stay. According to Ethan, Chloe barely spoke to anyone during the first hour. She mostly sat alone and avoided eye contact. That surprised him because it didn't fit the image he had painted of her. Eventually one of the cousins encouraged them to talk privately. Ethan reluctantly agreed. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. Ethan later described it as one of the strangest interactions of his life. Chloe didn't apologize. She didn't argue. She didn't demand anything. Instead, she simply asked whether he had read the letter she sent. Ethan told her no. Chloe looked disappointed but not surprised. Then she said something that immediately irritated him. She told him that if he truly wanted to understand why their family was so broken, he needed to stop asking their parents questions and start asking everyone else. Ethan thought she was playing games. He accused her of trying to manipulate him again. Chloe responded with a sentence that would stick in his head for weeks afterward. She said, "You've spent your whole life protecting people who never protected me." Then she walked away. Now, if you're anything like me, this is probably the point where you'd start feeling confused. Up until now, Ethan's version of events made Chloe sound like the obvious villain. But people who are guilty usually spend their energy defending themselves. Chloe wasn't doing that. She wasn't posting online. She wasn't trying to win arguments. She wasn't even asking Ethan to forgive her. Instead, she seemed almost resigned to the fact that nobody believed her. And honestly, that started making me wonder if there was something bigger happening beneath the surface. Apparently, Ethan started wondering too. A few days later he admitted that Chloe's comment kept replaying in his mind. Out of curiosity, he finally opened the handwritten letter that had been sitting untouched in his drawer. He expected excuses. He expected blame. He expected another attempt to manipulate him. What he found was something completely different. The first page wasn't about money. It wasn't about family arguments. It wasn't about the birthday party. Instead, Chloe began the letter by saying she knew Ethan probably hated her and that she understood why. She wrote that she had spent years watching him defend people who didn't deserve it because he never knew the full truth about their childhood. Then she wrote a sentence that completely changed the direction of the story. She claimed there was a reason their parents had always treated her differently, a reason nobody had ever explained to Ethan. She said the secret had shaped every major decision in her life and every mistake she had ever made. The letter continued for several more pages, but Ethan stopped reading almost immediately. Why? Because halfway down the first page, Chloe made an accusation against someone in the family that was so shocking Ethan initially believed it had to be a lie. Yet even as he stared at the words, he couldn't shake the feeling that certain memories from his childhood suddenly made a lot more sense than they ever had before. Ethan admitted that after reading that sentence in Chloe's letter, he sat frozen for nearly 20 minutes. He reread the paragraph over and over, hoping he had misunderstood it. Part of him wanted to crumple the letter up and throw it away. Another part of him couldn't stop staring at the words. According to Chloe, the reason their parents had always treated her differently had nothing to do with favoritism, and it had nothing to do with her being spoiled. She claimed that when she was 13 years old, something happened inside their home that changed her life forever. More importantly, she claimed their parents had spent the next 15 years trying to keep it hidden. Ethan refused to believe it. He wrote in his update that the accusation felt impossible. The people Chloe was talking about were his parents. The same parents who worked multiple jobs to support the family. The same parents who attended every school event, every birthday, every holiday gathering. They weren't perfect, but they weren't monsters either. At least that's what Ethan kept telling himself. Still, curiosity got the better of him. For the first time in years, he began looking back at old memories through a different lens. And once he started, he found things he couldn't explain. He remembered how Chloe changed almost overnight during middle school. Before that, she had been outgoing, energetic, and constantly talking. Then suddenly she became withdrawn. Her grades dropped. She stopped spending time with friends. She spent hours alone in her room. At the time, everyone assumed it was a phase. Their parents certainly treated it that way. But looking back, Ethan realized nobody ever asked why such a dramatic change had happened. Then another memory surfaced. He remembered a particular evening when Chloe was 14. There had been a loud argument downstairs. Ethan couldn't remember exactly what started it, but he remembered hearing Chloe screaming and their father yelling back. A few minutes later, his mother came upstairs and told him to stay in his room. The next morning everyone acted like nothing had happened. Ethan never thought much about it after that. Now the memory felt different. Then he remembered the summer Chloe disappeared for 3 months. Until that moment, he had always viewed it as another example of irresponsible behavior. But after reading the letter, a question kept bothering him. If Chloe was truly just selfish and manipulative, why had their parents seemed relieved instead of angry when she returned? The more Ethan thought about it, the less sense it made. Eventually he decided to contact someone he hadn't spoken to in years, his cousin Rachel. Rachel was 3 years older than Chloe and had spent a lot of time at their house growing up. Ethan called her expecting reassurance. Instead, the conversation left him even more unsettled. At first Rachel avoided the topic entirely. She kept saying it wasn't her place to get involved. But after nearly an hour of discussion, she finally admitted something. She told Ethan that several relatives had been worried about Chloe when she was younger. Ethan immediately asked what she meant. Rachel hesitated before answering. Then she said something that made his stomach drop. She told him that there were family members who had tried to speak up years ago, but every time they did, the situation was shut down. Ethan demanded specifics. Rachel refused. She said the truth wasn't hers to tell. Before ending the call, she gave him the same advice Chloe had given him at the barbecue. Stop asking your parents. Start asking everyone else. At this point, Reddit exploded with theories. Thousands of commenters debated what was happening. Some believed Chloe had fabricated the entire story. Others suspected there had been abuse within the family. Many pointed out that multiple people were now independently suggesting Ethan didn't know the full truth. For the first time since posting, Ethan admitted he was no longer certain of his own version of events. And honestly, if I were in his position, I'd probably feel the same way. Imagine spending your entire life believing one story about your family only to discover there might be another version hidden underneath it. That's the kind of thing that can make you question every memory you've ever trusted. Determined to get answers, Ethan started contacting extended family members one by one. Most refused to talk. Some claimed they didn't know anything. Others changed the subject entirely. But one conversation stood out. His grandmother agreed to meet him for lunch. Ethan expected her to defend his parents. Instead, she spent most of the meal looking uncomfortable. Finally, after nearly an hour, Ethan asked a direct question. He wanted to know whether Chloe's claims had any basis in reality. His grandmother didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared down at the table for several seconds. Then she quietly admitted that there had been concerns when Chloe was younger. Ethan felt his heart start racing. He asked what kind of concerns. His grandmother shook her head and said she couldn't discuss details. But before leaving, she grabbed his hand and said something he would never forget. She told him that Chloe had spent years carrying burdens that should never have belonged to a child. Then she added that Ethan wasn't the only victim of the family's silence. That sentence haunted him. Victim. It wasn't a word he ever associated with Chloe. In his mind, Chloe had always been the source of the family's problems. Yet more and more people seemed to view her as someone who had been hurt rather than someone who caused harm. That night Ethan returned home and finished reading the rest of Chloe's letter. What he discovered in the remaining pages shattered the last pieces of certainty he still had. Because Chloe didn't just explain why she disappeared for 3 months. She revealed where she had gone, who had helped her leave, and the terrifying reason she had believed staying with the family was more dangerous than running away into the unknown. After finishing the rest of Chloe's letter, Ethan said he barely slept that night. He spent hours pacing around his apartment, reading the pages again and again, trying to convince himself there had to be another explanation. According to Chloe, the 3 months she disappeared weren't some reckless adventure or attention-seeking stunt. She claimed she had left because she was terrified. In the letter, she described years of living in constant fear inside her own home. She wrote that when she was 13, an incident occurred that completely changed the way she viewed her family. She didn't go into every detail, but she made one thing painfully clear: after it happened, she tried to tell people. According to Chloe, she spoke to her mother first. Her mother didn't believe her. Or maybe she did believe her and simply couldn't face the consequences. Chloe admitted she still wasn't sure which possibility hurt more. Then she claimed she tried telling another relative. That conversation somehow made its way back to the family, and afterward she was warned not to discuss it again. Ethan could hardly process what he was reading. Every page seemed to challenge everything he thought he knew. Chloe described years of feeling isolated, dismissed, and blamed whenever she tried to explain why she was struggling. She claimed that many of the behaviors Ethan viewed as selfishness were actually signs that she was falling apart. The money problems, failed jobs, disappearing acts, and unstable relationships weren't random mistakes. According to her, they were the consequences of carrying trauma she never learned how to handle. Ethan wanted to reject the entire thing. But there was one detail he couldn't ignore. Chloe included dates, locations, and names. Some of those details connected directly to memories he already had. Others matched stories relatives had told him over the years. The more he checked, the more pieces seemed to fit together. A few days later, Ethan finally decided to confront his parents. He drove to their house without warning. His mother greeted him warmly at the door, apparently unaware of what was coming. Ethan said the conversation started calmly enough. He asked simple questions about Chloe's childhood. His parents gave simple answers. Then he brought up the letter. The moment he mentioned it, everything changed. According to Ethan, his mother's expression immediately shifted. His father became unusually defensive. Ethan asked whether Chloe had ever reported being afraid as a teenager. His father dismissed the question. Ethan asked why so many relatives seemed reluctant to discuss the past. Again, his father became angry. The tension escalated quickly. Then Ethan asked the question he had been avoiding since reading the letter. Had Chloe ever accused someone in the family of hurting her? For several seconds nobody spoke. Ethan said the silence felt louder than any argument. Finally, his father stood up and demanded to know why he was digging up old nonsense. Not old lies. Not false accusations. Old nonsense. That wording stuck with Ethan immediately. His mother began crying. His father insisted Chloe had always been troubled and prone to exaggeration. Ethan pointed out that multiple relatives seemed to know something. His father responded by accusing Chloe of manipulating the entire family. The argument ended with Ethan walking out. But before leaving, he noticed something that bothered him even more than the conversation itself. His mother never denied Chloe's claims. Not once. She cried. She begged him to stop asking questions. She asked him to let the past stay buried. But she never actually said Chloe was lying. At this point, Reddit was completely divided. Some readers still believed Chloe might be exaggerating. Others felt increasingly convinced that a serious cover-up had occurred. Ethan admitted he no longer knew what to believe. For the first time in his life, he found himself wondering whether his sister had been telling the truth all along. And honestly, this is where the story started changing for me too. Up until now, there was still room for doubt. But when multiple family members refuse to answer basic questions, when stories don't line up, and when people become angry the moment certain topics are mentioned, it starts raising concerns. Ethan apparently felt the same way. Over the next week, he continued contacting relatives. Most remained cautious. Then one person finally agreed to speak openly, his uncle David. According to Ethan, David had spent years avoiding family gatherings and keeping his distance from everyone. Growing up, Ethan assumed David was simply antisocial. Now he learned there was another reason. During their conversation, David revealed that years earlier he had confronted Ethan's parents about concerns involving Chloe. He refused to discuss every detail, but he admitted there had been a major argument. Afterward, his relationship with the family never recovered. Ethan asked why nobody had told him any of this. David's answer was devastating. He said that when families become desperate to protect their image, the truth often becomes collateral damage. Then David shared something that completely shattered Ethan's understanding of Chloe's disappearance. According to him, Chloe hadn't vanished alone. Several relatives had secretly helped her leave. They provided transportation, money, and a temporary place to stay. Ethan couldn't believe what he was hearing. If that was true, it meant multiple adults had believed Chloe was safer away from home than inside it. Suddenly the entire story looked different. The disappearance. The financial support. The overprotective behavior from their parents. The awkward silences. The ruined relationships between relatives. It all seemed connected somehow. Then David revealed one final detail. During the months Chloe was gone, there had apparently been discussions about involving authorities. Those discussions never went anywhere, but the fact they happened at all left Ethan stunned. For years he believed his sister disappeared because she was irresponsible. Now he was learning that some family members had viewed her departure as an escape. Before ending the conversation, David told Ethan there was one person he still needed to speak with if he truly wanted answers. Not a relative. Not a parent. A former counselor who had worked with Chloe when she was a teenager. Ethan didn't even know this counselor existed. His parents had never mentioned them. Yet according to David, that counselor had witnessed enough to become deeply concerned. And what Ethan would learn from that meeting would finally reveal why Chloe spent nearly 15 years carrying a reputation she never deserved. Ethan said he spent the next several days trying to decide whether contacting Chloe's former counselor was even a good idea. Part of him felt guilty for digging deeper into something his sister had clearly struggled with for years. Another part of him felt like he had already come too far to stop now. Questions that once seemed impossible to answer were finally producing pieces of a larger picture, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure whether he had been protecting his family or protecting a lie. Eventually he tracked down the counselor, a woman named Rebecca, who had retired several years earlier. At first she refused to discuss anything. She explained that confidentiality rules prevented her from sharing private information. Ethan understood, but before ending the call, he mentioned Chloe by name and explained that he was her brother. There was a long pause. Then Rebecca asked a question that immediately caught him off guard. She wanted to know whether Chloe was doing okay. Ethan admitted he didn't know. He explained that they barely spoke anymore. Another silence followed. Finally, Rebecca said she couldn't reveal private counseling sessions, but she could tell him something general. She said that throughout her career, she had worked with many young people who felt trapped in situations where the adults around them failed them. Then she added something that Ethan would later describe as one of the most painful things anyone had ever said to him. Rebecca told him that some children spend years begging to be believed, and when nobody listens, they eventually stop asking for help altogether. Ethan immediately knew who she was talking about. After the call ended, he sat in his car for nearly an hour. Every conversation he had over the past few weeks seemed to point in the same direction. Nobody was outright confirming Chloe's claims, but nobody was dismissing them either. More importantly, the people closest to the situation all seemed to share the same regret. They hadn't done enough. Around this time, Ethan posted another update to Reddit. Unlike his earlier posts, this one felt completely different. Gone was the confidence. Gone was the certainty that Chloe was the problem. Instead, he admitted that he no longer knew who had been telling the truth. Thousands of commenters who had supported him from the beginning began changing their opinions. Some even apologized for the harsh things they had previously written about Chloe. Others urged Ethan to contact his sister directly before it was too late. The response was overwhelming. For the first time, the discussion wasn't about whether Chloe was a bad person. It was about whether she had been carrying a burden alone for most of her life. And honestly, if you've been following this story from the beginning, you can probably understand why so many people started switching sides. The evidence wasn't arriving in one dramatic revelation. It was arriving piece by piece, each new detail making the old version of events harder to believe. A few days after posting the update, Ethan finally called Chloe. He wasn't sure she would answer. To his surprise, she picked up almost immediately. According to Ethan, neither of them spoke for several seconds. Years of resentment, anger, and misunderstanding hung in the silence between them. Eventually Ethan apologized for ignoring the letter. Chloe thanked him for reading it. Then they talked for nearly 3 hours. Ethan later described that conversation as one of the most emotionally exhausting experiences of his life. Chloe explained that she had spent years trying to understand why so many people viewed her as the family problem. She admitted she made mistakes. She admitted she handled situations poorly. She admitted she wasn't perfect. But she also said something Ethan couldn't stop thinking about. She told him that when people spend years surviving something painful, they don't always become the version of themselves they wanted to be. Sometimes they become messy. Sometimes they become angry. Sometimes they fall apart. According to Chloe, every failed job, every financial mistake, every period of disappearing from family events stemmed from struggles she never properly addressed. She wasn't asking Ethan to excuse her behavior. She simply wanted him to understand where it came from. Then Ethan asked the question he had been afraid to ask since opening the letter. Why hadn't she fought harder to tell him the truth years ago? Chloe's answer broke his heart. She told him she had tried. Multiple times. According to her, every attempt ended the same way. Either someone shut the conversation down, or Ethan defended their parents before she could finish explaining. Eventually she stopped trying because she believed he had already chosen which version of the story he wanted to believe. Reading that part of the update was rough. Because from Ethan's perspective, he had spent years thinking he was protecting his family. From Chloe's perspective, he had spent years protecting the very people who refused to protect her. Neither of them saw the situation the same way, yet somehow both perspectives made sense. Near the end of their conversation, Chloe revealed something she had never told him before. The reason she stood up during their mother's birthday party wasn't because she wanted attention. It wasn't because she wanted to ruin the celebration. She had recently learned information that made her realize certain family members were still hiding the truth. Seeing everyone gathered together pretending everything was normal finally pushed her over the edge. She snapped. Ethan admitted that hearing this completely changed how he viewed that night. What he remembered as another selfish outburst might actually have been the breaking point after years of frustration and silence. Then Chloe told him something that sent chills down his spine. She said there was still one piece of the story he didn't know. One detail that explained why so many relatives remained terrified of discussing the past even now. Ethan asked what she meant. Chloe hesitated before answering. Then she revealed that years ago, someone else in the family had come forward with a similar accusation. Unlike Chloe, that person never told anyone publicly. They stayed silent. And according to Chloe, the identity of that person would finally expose the real reason so many adults had worked so hard to keep the family's secrets buried. After that phone call ended, Ethan said he felt like the ground beneath his entire life had disappeared. For weeks he had been uncovering pieces of a story he never knew existed, but Chloe's final statement introduced a question that terrified him more than anything else. If another person in the family had made a similar accusation years ago, who was it? And why had nobody ever mentioned it? The answer arrived sooner than he expected. 2 days later Chloe agreed to meet him in person. According to Ethan, it was the first time they had sat down together without arguing in nearly a decade. They met at a small coffee shop halfway between their apartments. At first the conversation felt awkward. Years of distance don't disappear overnight. But eventually Ethan asked the question directly. He wanted to know who the other person was. Chloe looked down at the table for several seconds before answering. When she finally spoke, the name she gave him hit harder than anything he had heard so far. It wasn't a distant relative. It wasn't a family friend. It was their Aunt Sarah, their mother's younger sister. Ethan was stunned. He had always known Aunt Sarah as the relative who rarely attended family events. Growing up, he assumed she simply didn't get along with everyone else. According to Chloe, the truth was far more complicated. Decades earlier, long before Ethan or Chloe were born, Sarah had privately told several family members about something that happened to her. The accusation involved the same person Chloe later accused years afterward. According to Chloe, Sarah was dismissed, pressured to stay quiet, and eventually distanced herself from most of the family. Ethan couldn't believe what he was hearing. He immediately contacted Sarah, expecting confusion or denial. Instead, she agreed to meet. What followed was the conversation that finally shattered every remaining doubt he had. Sarah explained that she spent most of her adult life avoiding the family because being around them forced her to relive painful memories. She admitted that when Chloe came forward years later, she immediately believed her. Not because Chloe convinced her, but because Chloe described patterns that sounded frighteningly familiar. Sarah also revealed something else. Several relatives had known pieces of the truth for years. Not the entire truth, but enough to understand why Chloe struggled. Some tried to help quietly. Others convinced themselves it was better not to get involved. A few simply chose denial because accepting reality would have forced them to confront uncomfortable questions about their own actions. Ethan later wrote that this realization hurt almost as much as discovering the original secret. The idea that multiple adults saw warning signs yet allowed Chloe to carry the burden alone filled him with anger. But the hardest part was still ahead. Armed with everything he had learned, Ethan confronted his parents one final time. This meeting was completely different from the first. There were no vague questions. No uncertainty. No room for deflection. Ethan laid out everything he had discovered. The relatives. The counselor. Sarah. Chloe's letter. One by one, he presented the pieces. According to Ethan, his father became increasingly agitated while his mother sat silently crying. Then something happened that he never expected. His mother finally spoke. And for the first time in years, she stopped asking him to let the past go. Instead, she admitted that mistakes had been made. Ethan immediately demanded clarification. Mistakes? Was that really the word she wanted to use? His mother broke down completely. Through tears, she confessed that years earlier she chose to prioritize keeping the family together over confronting painful truths. She admitted she convinced herself that silence would protect everyone. Instead, it protected nobody. Not Chloe. Not Sarah. Not even the family itself. The damage simply spread across generations. Ethan asked why she never told him. Her answer was devastatingly simple. Because once a lie survives long enough, people begin organizing their lives around protecting it. And eventually they become afraid of what will happen if it collapses. After that conversation, Ethan left and didn't speak to his parents for several months. He needed time to process everything. More importantly, he needed time to rebuild a relationship with the sister he spent years misunderstanding. According to his final update, that process wasn't easy. One apology couldn't erase years of pain. One conversation couldn't undo a lifetime of assumptions. Trust had to be rebuilt slowly. But for the first time in years, they were trying. The most emotional moment came near the end of Ethan's final post. He revealed that he had asked Chloe a question he couldn't stop thinking about. After everything that happened, after years of being doubted, blamed, and treated like the problem, why did she keep trying to reconnect with him? Why send the letter? Why answer his phone call? Why meet him at all? Chloe's response was surprisingly simple. She told him that despite everything, he was still her brother. She said she never stopped hoping that one day he would see the truth for himself. Not because she wanted revenge. Not because she wanted someone else to hate their parents. But because she wanted at least one person in the family to finally understand what she had been carrying all these years. Ethan ended his final update by apologizing publicly. Not only to Chloe, but also to the thousands of readers he originally convinced that she was the villain. He admitted that he had told a story he genuinely believed was true. The problem was that he only knew half of it. Looking back, he realized that every example he used to prove Chloe was selfish had actually been evidence that she was struggling. Every mistake he judged harshly existed within a context he never bothered to understand. The woman he spent years viewing as the source of the family's problems was, in many ways, one of the people most damaged by them. And that's where this story ends. Honestly, when I first heard Ethan's original post, I agreed with him. Most people did. On the surface, the facts seemed obvious. But stories are complicated, and people are even more complicated. Sometimes the person who appears irresponsible is actually carrying invisible wounds. Sometimes the loudest conflict hides a much deeper truth. And sometimes the hardest thing we can do is accept that someone we trusted may not have been the person we believed they were. If there's one lesson to take from this story, it's that understanding someone's behavior isn't the same thing as excusing it. Chloe made mistakes. Ethan made mistakes. Their parents made mistakes. The difference is that some mistakes were visible while others stayed hidden for years. In the end, the title turned out to be true. I was on his side until the final update. Then I realized the story wasn't really about choosing sides at all. It was about finally seeing the whole picture.